Hello and welcome. Take a slow breath with me, because today we begin a quiet journey that gently questions every limit you have accepted as truth, without ever asking who placed it there. Most people live inside boundaries they did not choose, waking up each day believing life has fixed rules, when in reality those rules were learned through repetition, fear, and borrowed opinions. From a young age you were told what is realistic, what is safe, and what is beyond reach. And slowly those words shaped your thinking more than your actual ability ever did. Over time, these ideas stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like facts, even though no one ever tested them deeply or proved they had to remain permanent. When someone says nothing is impossible, the mind reacts quickly, listing reasons, failures, and circumstances as evidence, because doubt feels more familiar than open possibility. This reaction is not weakness, it is conditioning, formed by experiences where effort did not immediately succeed, and the brain learned to protect itself by lowering expectations. The mind prefers certainty over truth, and limitation often feels safer than hope, because hope asks you to risk disappointment, while limitation promises emotional control. Many dreams were not abandoned because they were impossible, but because the discomfort of uncertainty felt heavier than the pain of regret waiting silently in the future. What we call impossible is often just something that requires patience, repetition, learning, and emotional strength that has not yet been developed fully. When you stop trying after failure, the brain records that stopping prevented pain, reinforcing the belief that quitting was wisdom rather than fear in disguise. This is how invisible prisons are built, not with force, but with quiet agreements made in moments of doubt, exhaustion, and comparison with others. Look closely, and you will see that most limits in your life were never challenged honestly. They were accepted during moments when confidence was low. This part is not meant to inspire you emotionally, but to slow you down enough to notice how quickly the word impossible appears in your thinking. Once you notice it, you create distance between yourself and the belief, and that distance is where freedom begins to grow silently. Nothing is impossible does not mean success is guaranteed. It means your current reality is not the final authority on what you can become. Before we move forward, allow this idea to sit gently within you, because understanding always comes before transformation, and clarity always comes before action. Once you become aware of how often your mind says impossible, you start noticing that it usually appears before effort, protecting you from uncertainty rather than guiding you toward truth. Impossibility is rarely a fact confirmed by reality. It is usually a conclusion formed early to avoid discomfort, failure, judgment, or the emotional risk of trying sincerely. The brain is designed to conserve energy, and labeling something impossible saves effort, because trying requires focus, patience, and the willingness to face temporary setbacks. When something feels unfamiliar, the mind interprets it as danger, even when no real threat exists, because familiarity feels safer than growth to a survival-oriented system. This is why many people confuse fear with intuition, believing they are being realistic when they are actually listening to learned hesitation shaped by past experiences. Think about how many skills you now perform naturally that once felt confusing, difficult, or completely out of reach before practice rewired your confidence slowly. Nothing changed except repetition, exposure, and patience, yet the mind now treats those abilities as obvious, forgetting it once believed the same learning was impossible. Failure plays a crucial role here, because when failure is misunderstood, it becomes evidence against you rather than information guiding you toward improvement. A single failure means little, but the meaning you attach to it determines whether you grow or quietly step back into limitation. Most people stop not because they cannot continue, but because they interpret difficulty as a sign they should stop instead of a sign they are learning. When you reframe failure as feedback, the idea of impossibility weakens, because progress becomes a process rather than a verdict about your ability. Nothing is impossible does not deny struggle. It simply denies the belief that struggle is proof of incapacity or permanent limitation. The moment you replace "I can't" with "I don't know how yet," the mind stays open, flexible, and engaged instead of defensive and closed. This small shift keeps curiosity alive, and curiosity is what allows learning, adaptation, and creative solutions to emerge naturally over time. As this understanding settles in, you begin realizing that most limits dissolve not through force, but through patience and consistent engagement. In the next part, we will explore how action transforms belief, and why confidence is built after movement, not before it. When you begin taking action despite uncertainty, something subtle changes inside you, because action interrupts fear and proves that movement is possible even without complete confidence. Most people wait to feel ready, calm, or certain before acting, but readiness is often a result of action, not a condition that appears before you begin. Confidence is built through exposure, not imagination, and each small step taken rewires the brain to see challenge as survivable rather than threatening. At first, the discomfort feels loud because the mind is leaving familiar territory, but over time, that discomfort becomes normal and even expected. This is how growth works, not through sudden transformation, but through repeated moments of choosing action over hesitation. When you act consistently, the brain updates its internal map, slowly replacing old beliefs about limitation with new evidence gathered through experience. What once felt impossible now feels difficult. What felt difficult becomes manageable, and what felt unreachable slowly enters the realm of normal effort. This progression is natural, but only visible when you stay long enough in the process instead of leaving at the first sign of resistance. Fear does not disappear on this path, but it loses authority, becoming background noise instead of the voice that decides your direction. People who achieve extraordinary results are not fearless. They are simply practiced at moving forward while fear speaks quietly in the background. Each time you act despite doubt, you strengthen trust in yourself, not because outcomes are perfect, but because you proved you can handle uncertainty. This self-trust is powerful because it shifts focus from controlling results to controlling effort, learning, and persistence. Many people underestimate how much identity changes through repetition, because the brain begins to see you as someone who does not quit easily. Once identity shifts, motivation becomes less necessary, because behavior is guided by self-image rather than temporary emotional states. At this stage, effort no longer feels like force. It feels like alignment with who you are becoming through consistent engagement. Setbacks still occur, but they lose their emotional weight because they are interpreted as part of the process rather than proof of failure. When effort becomes normal, excuses lose strength, and the mind stops searching for permission to stop at the first sign of discomfort. Nothing is impossible becomes practical here, because you experience how progress unfolds slowly when attention stays on process instead of outcome. Now, when you return to the idea that nothing is impossible, it no longer feels like motivation. It feels like responsibility for how you choose to think, act, and respond daily. This belief does not promise comfort or quick results. It promises growth for those willing to stay present through effort, patience, and uncertainty without quitting early. Most people search for proof before committing, but proof only appears after commitment, creating a paradox that keeps many people waiting indefinitely. When you stop waiting for certainty, life begins responding differently, because movement creates clarity that thinking alone can never produce. Nothing is impossible does not mean you control outcomes. It means you control engagement, learning, and the willingness to adapt when things do not go as planned. This shift removes the fear of starting, because starting no longer means success or failure. It means participation in your own growth. Once you accept this, comparison loses power, because your progress is no longer measured against others, but against who you were yesterday. Small, consistent actions begin reshaping identity quietly, and over time, you realize you are no longer the person who stopped easily. This is where freedom appears, not freedom from effort, but freedom from the belief that effort is pointless or wasted. Every challenge becomes an invitation to expand capacity rather than a signal to retreat into old limitations. You stop asking whether something is possible and start asking what kind of patience, skill, and resilience it requires from you. That question shifts life from frustration to curiosity, because curiosity keeps you moving forward even when results are delayed. Nothing is impossible becomes a lived experience here, not because everything works, but because you no longer quit on yourself prematurely. Over time, this mindset builds quiet confidence, not loud confidence, but the kind that stays steady when conditions are uncertain. When setbacks happen, they no longer define you. They simply redirect you, showing where adjustment is needed instead of where hope should end. This is the true meaning of nothing is impossible, not denial of difficulty, but refusal to let difficulty decide your future. As this journey ends, remember this gently: your limits are not discovered, they are chosen, often unconsciously, and they can be rechosen again. And when you choose growth repeatedly, even without guarantees, life slowly opens paths that once felt unreachable, proving that impossibility was never the truth.